I don't usually feel comfortable talking about how I feel about God, especially not in public. I come from the South, many of you know, where God is often an advertising term or a prelude to something I really don't want to get into, so I didn't grow up with open, honest discourse. I tend to have the view that God is best kept private. I was surprised to find a similar problem around here, to be honest. When I hear about God in a seminary context, I keep hearing about a God I don't recognize. An impersonal God. God who doesn't answer prayers. A God who doesn't care about me. I've heard this is an academic approach, an enlightened approach. It casts off the primitive notion that we can bribe God through sacrifices and flattery, and shuns the view of prayer as magical hocus pocus, changing the divine calculus in our favor. Put another way, learned colleagues and professors have told me that this is something our congregants believe in, and that we will have to deal with. I tried a few times years ago to share my views of God with others, and by and large I got the same response. The other person would shake his head and chuckle and say, I don't believe that God will strike me down for eating a cheeseburger. Well, I don't believe God will strike you down for eating a cheeseburger either. I just don't think God's going to be happy about it. Excuse me for sounding primitive, but if I believed in a God who didn't care whether or not I kept kosher, I wouldn't bother. I like crab too much. I think keeping kosher, because these are the rules and norms of the Jewish people, is both a premise of questionable validity and a deification of the Jewish people. Unfortunately, it seems like most people think that talking about God this much, and in such a personal way, might border on the un-Jewish, might seem more in its element under a tent with a gospel choir. Well, that's how people need to hear it, then here it is. I believe in a very personal God. I believe God cares about me, and cares what I do and how I feel. I love God deeply. B'chol lavavi, u'v'chol nafshi, u'v'chol meodi. And I tell God so every day. Every day. I took my first steps toward keeping kosher in a vague attempt to do God's will. I still keep kosher because God wants me to keep kosher, not because the community wants me to. I went to Israel after college with no doubt in my mind that this was the path God had laid out for me. I came to rabbinical school because God wants me to be a rabbi. I am a Jew because I believe in God. I am an observant Jew because I believe it is what God wants of me in all its details and nuances. If I didn't believe that God wanted me to daven shacharit, I wouldn't get up in the morning. And indeed, there have been plenty of times when I haven't. And when I don't, I truly believe that God is disappointed in me. I am not perfect in my observance because God sees fit to let me make my own mistakes.
It's me, standing in the need of prayer. It's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer.
This past Shabbat, we heard that when a person brings ma'aser, he declares that he has followed all the laws of tithing and has done everything necessary to keep it clean, pure, and fit for offering. This declaration ends in verse 14 with the following words: Shamati b'kol Hashem Elokai, asiti k'kol asher tzivitani. I have listened to the voice of the Lord my God. I have done what you have commanded me. We don't get to say things like this anymore. The closest we get to come to declaring we have fulfilled God's will is asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. We have just davened mincha. How would it have changed your experience if you had ended your Amidah by declaring, I have just done the will of the Lord my God? Would it make you nervous? Would it make you slow down? Would it make you feel judged? Would it help remind you that you were standing before the Holy One, blessed be He?
The Holy One, blessed be He.
In our halachic discussions, we sometimes cite the phrase, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Both of these are the words of the living God. When we use this, we often mean that we must treat two differing halachic opinions as equally valid. The statement comes from Eruvin 13b, in which we find the following. Amar Rabbi Abba Amar Shemuel, Shalosh shanim nechleku Beit Shammai uBeit Hillel, halalu omerim halacha kemotenu, v'halacha omerim halacha kemotenu. Yatze avad kol ve'amera, elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim hein, v'halacha kebeit Hillel. Rabbi Abba said in the name of Shemuel, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed for 3 years, each saying the law is according to us. Then the voice of God came down, declaring both of these are the words of the living God, but the halacha is like Beit Hillel. Although, or perhaps because, both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel had made their halachic rulings in accordance with God's will, God chose between them. This kind of direct involvement in the halachic process barely happens in the Gemara, and to my knowledge it doesn't happen at all today. So the rest of the sugya tries to figure out why God had wanted things one way and not the other equally valid way. To me, this is a perfect example of what we do in the halachic process. We humans are doing our best to figure out the behavioral implications of what God has told us and what God wants from us when God hasn't been so explicit. I'll ask the same question that I asked before. What would happen if every law committee meeting ended with Shamati b'kol Hashem Elokai, Asiti k'chol asher tzivitani? By having met and searched together for the words of the living God, we have heeded the voice of the Lord our God. I taught a Hebrew school class years ago to a minyan of 4th graders. When I told them that the Shekhinah appears among any group of Jews learning Torah together, they looked at me like I was stupid. So I took them into the sanctuary for an exercise in sensing the presence of God. I seated the 10 of them as far apart as possible in a 500-seat room and had them sing Ashrei together. Singing together in the empty sanctuary like that, they felt it. More than felt it, they heard it. They heard each other, they heard themselves, and they heard their own voices echoing back from the space between themselves and their classmates. I have no doubt that God is here with us at this moment. I can feel God in the pursuit of Torah study, in the power of pursuing it together, and in what has driven me to this point in my life. On this place, on this day. Adonai Elohai, b'kolecha shamati, v'hineni menasa la'asot k'chol asher tzivitani. I feel your presence, Lord my God. Please be proud of me.
O Lord my God, b'kolecha shamati, and I try to do all you ask of me. O Lord my God, b'kolecha shamati, and I try to do all you ask of me.
Kadesh de Rabbanan.